Right, welcome to today's 31 players video. So today's 31 players, I thought, all right, this is something else I wanted to do a list of. So we'll go through this, and it's 31 players I hope play all 56 games this year. Players that I hope we don't see any kind of injury issues with, and in order to qualify for this list, they have to have missed games last year or have an injury history that leads you to be concerned that they may miss some time, right? So, and if there's anybody you'd like to add to the list, by all means add them below. I limited myself to one player from each team because in the case of, I don't know, Columbus, Colorado, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, there were a lot to choose from. So, and I'm just using those four as examples. Again, there's other teams you could mention below that have had massive injury issues over the last year and a half, 2 years. So we'll start, and again, it's division by division, alphabetical order within the division. Calgary. I went with Mark Giordano. Now, I thought about Chris Tanev, who does have his injury concerns at all times. But I went with Giordano as he did miss some games this past season. He is 36 years of age. And so him being able to stay in every game and be able to play, it's important because Calgary does have the next ones coming up and guys like Valimaki and Anderson. But I don't think they're quite there yet. So it's important that Giordano has a healthy season. For the Oilers, I went with Connor McDavid. I thought about James Neal, and I thought, well, yeah, but if something happens to McDavid, it feels like that's pretty major too, and he missed some games this past season, and so I'll put McDavid up there, but I would understand if somebody wants to put James Neal up there instead because Neal missed more games. But yeah, Connor McDavid, for obvious reasons, if the Oilers were to lose Connor McDavid, yes, Draisaitl's an excellent center, but it does leave you a bit thin down the middle up front. It means you have to put Nugent Hopkins back in the middle, so you're stretching your wings out a little bit, and then yeah, it has a cascade of an effect on the rest of the roster. Jonathan Drouin is the one I went for with Montreal. Drouin missed a lot of games last year, and for Jonathan Drouin, it's not just a matter of staying healthy. It's battling to stay as a member of the Montreal Canadiens if that's truly where he wants to play. Because his name's certainly been connected to trade rumors for a long time now. And if he were to get injured, that could make it more difficult for him. Because there are players in the Montreal system who could very well jump in and play his role. And then he finds himself out of a job. So it's important that he stay healthy and he prove his worth. With Ottawa, I went with Christian Wolanin, who missed almost all of last season. I like Wolanin, but the weird thing is that Ottawa's kind of set themselves up with enough veterans on the blue line that if Wolanin's not good to go, they're kind of covered. So for Wolanin, he's got to come in, stay healthy, and battle to keep his place in the lineup. With Toronto, Morgan Rielly. Missed a bunch of games last year. And Morgan Rielly, I cannot overstate how important he is to the Toronto blue line. Toronto fans know this. And so for me, Morgan Rielly is the guy that you really need to make sure stays healthy. There are forwards, thought about like Zach Hyman, but Zach Hyman now appears to be penciled in for the third line. There's enough forwards to make up for what Hyman provides if he gets hurt, but there's not really much you can do if Rielly gets hurt, right? Vancouver, I went with Brock Besser. Now, there are a few guys I could have gone with for Vancouver, but I went with Besser. At this stage, if Besser gets hurt during this season, I'll jump on the injury-prone bandwagon. I'll do it, and I don't want to. I don't. His injuries have all been unrelated, but that's how injury-prone works. Injury-prone is not, the guy's got a bum knee. That's a chronic injury. That's a long-term injury that they just don't get better from. Injury-prone means one day it's a shoulder, a couple weeks later he's hurt his ankle, he might have a back problem a couple months later. It's just, there's players that go through this. So Besser needs to stay healthy. I would also say that much like Drouin, he needs to show how important he is to the Canucks lineup. It's hard to do that when you're hurt. For Winnipeg, I went with Matthew Perreault. Perreault missed a bunch of games. Perreault also looking to prove his spot in the lineup is important and his worth to the team. He needs to play to be able to do that. So Matthew Perreault is the one I went with. Brian Little, we know, is not playing, so it's not going to be Little that's on the board, but, hopefully Little's able to resume his career in October. So, moving on from the Northern Division, we'll move over to the Central, where I've got Jordan Staal there for Carolina. There were a few that I thought about for Carolina, but I went with Staal. Missed a bunch of games last year, and Stahl's at that stage too, where you got to factor age into this too, and mileage as well, right? Where some of these players, because of the style of game they play, because of the physical nature of the games they play, the punishing minutes, once they start to wear down, and so Jordan Staal needs to show he's going to reverse that this year and needs to stay healthy and in the lineup. For Chicago, I went with Brent Seabrook for obvious reasons. Seabrook, he's got that contract that I think Chicago would love to trade if they could. For Seabrook, Seabrook, it's a tough one. There are some Chicago fans that would love to see him in the lineup. There's others that wouldn't. I've seen that divide even when he's back and playing. But it's been going on for so long. It would be nice to see him healthy this year, just for a change. Columbus, I went with Jonas Korpisalo. Korpisalo missed a bunch of games last year. If he misses a bunch of games this year, he runs the risk of being shown as being redundant. So let's say Elvis goes on a nice run, Kiv Lennox comes in and provides solid backup work. It could make it so that Korpisalo is the guy that they jettison this coming summer, and they go with the other two instead. So Korpisalo needs to stay healthy, and again, for a lot of these guys, it's about make sure the team knows how important you are. Dallas, John Klingberg. Klingberg missed some games last year. I cannot overstate how important both Klingberg and Heiskanen are to Dallas. They can't afford to lose Klingberg for any period of time, or they're in deep trouble. Even with Johns returning, and I thought about putting Johns in there, but the team's played without Stephen Johns for so long that while I'd like to see him play, Klingberg, they need him to stay healthy. So with some of these are players the team needs to stay healthy. In some cases, like I said with Drouin, with Besser, the player needs to stay healthy. And in Detroit's case, it's kind of both. Anthony Mantha, and Detroit fans go, yeah, we know. Mantha's struggled with staying healthy. He's a guy who will score a ton of points and goals. He's got to stay healthy to do it, much like Besser in Vancouver. And so hopefully this is a season where he's able to do that. And while it's 56 games, so it's 26 less than normal, because it's over a shortened period of time, it's a 116-day season, we could see more injuries than normal. So for Mantha, he needs to stay healthy. Florida, I went with Patrick Hornqvist. Because, and this is coming back to the Jordan Staal argument, because of the style of game that Hornqvist plays, he's going to get hurt. That's just the way it works. And whether they're injuries he can play through or injuries he can't, that's the question mark. He seems to miss games every year. For Florida, they need him to stay healthy. Really that simple. With Nashville, Philip Forsberg. Forsberg is probably the most dynamic forward they have. I think their overall best goal scorer is still Arvidsson. I'm hoping he gets back to that this year. But Forsberg is likely their best forward. And we can have that debate some other time. Maybe that'll be my 31 at some point before the season starts. 31 best forwards on each team. There won't be any arguing with that either. I know how the internet works. So Forsberg, again, he didn't miss as many games this year as in previous seasons, but still, missing time seemingly every year. Steven Stamkos for Tampa. That would be self-explanatory since he's already been lining up on the right wing, taking Kucherov's spot on the right wing. And so if he's going to fill in for Kucherov, they need him to stay healthy. If something happens with Stamkos this year, it feels like that would have a more dramatic influence on the team because they're already down Kucherov for the season. So we move on to the East. Boston, this is an obvious one. Now, this is the first name that's shown up in 2 of my 31 player videos. That's Ondrej Kase. I'm pretty sure I had him as the 31 players to watch video. Kase has trouble with staying healthy, so it's a double whammy. There's Ducks fans probably nodding to this. It's a double whammy with him. He does seem to have his dry spells goal-scoring wise, and then he's hurt a lot as well. So you can look at some of those dry spells with the goal scoring and wonder if it's related to coming back from injury. Odds are that's probably the case, often. For Buffalo, I went with Linus Ullmark. Ullmark missed, I think it was 17 games last season with injury. They aren't really in a position where they can afford to lose him. So at this stage, it looks like it's still going to be Ullmark and Hutton as the goaltenders for Buffalo. So they need Ullmark to stay healthy. because he's probably going to play, I would say out of the 56 games, he probably plays 35. I'll just say probably 35 of those 56. For New Jersey, Corey Crawford. So the newly imported goaltender from Chicago, Crawford. Due to his concussion history, we're always going to be watching Crawford. He stayed relatively healthy this past year in Chicago. He needs to be able to do that again for New Jersey. Blackwood is an excellent goaltender. Having Crawford there to mentor him this year could be huge, but it's going to be about Crawford being able to stay healthy the full season. With the Islanders, I went with Casey Cizikas, who missed roughly, I think, it's 20-some games this past year. Cizikas is a good energy forward, and I think he's better than other people of other fan bases may realize if you don't watch the Islanders regularly. So what Cizikas does is more important than the goals and assists part of it, and he's a key contributor to the Islanders. He needs to stay healthy. The Rangers, it was hard to find somebody. It was, I admit that. The Rangers, I went with Mika Zibanejad. So he missed some games this past season. He's not a guy who's injury prone by any stretch, as some of the guys on this board would be labeled. But for the Rangers to take that next step, Zibanejad needs to not only produce like he did last season, he needs to stay healthy and stay in the lineup. I think that's a key thing for the Rangers if they're going to compete in that group of death that's the Eastern Division. Philadelphia seems kind of self-explanatory with Nolan Patrick. Nolan Patrick coming back off of headaches. He's now been at camp. He's a full participant. It's important that Nolan Patrick plays this year. His contract's up at the end of the year. Now, if he didn't play, then they wouldn't have to worry about protecting him from the Seattle expansion, right? So there's some benefits to him not playing, but it is outweighed by the need for him to play at this stage, this far out from his draft year. He needs to be in the lineup and show that he's healthy again. That's really, really important. Pittsburgh, Evgeny Malkin. I thought about Crosby or Malkin, and I thought, well, Crosby missed games this year, but he was mostly healthy the 2 years previous. Malkin, it seems like every year we're talking about an injury. Every year. I've discussed how many more points and goals Malkin could have scored if not for injury in his career. It's a lot. It's not a small number. At some point, maybe I'll do a video on that, on players who've missed a lot of games with injury and where their scoring totals might be if they hadn't. But for Malkin, they need him to stay healthy. I thought about Gensel as well. Again, with certain teams, Pittsburgh included, there's a lot of names you could throw in there. So I went with Malkin. But let me know in the comment section below why it's Chris Letang. So, like I said, there's a lot of Penguins. Capitals, I went with Nicholas Backstrom. There's an asterisk here because there's going to be Capitals fans going, why is Backstrom there? So hopefully they see the asterisk and realize Shannon's going to explain why Backstrom's there. The Capitals were remarkably healthy when it came to their top players over the last year. And with their returning crew, Backstrom, though he didn't miss that many games, at age, I believe it's age 36 right now, and much like I have said with a couple of others, when you're older, and in his case, he's played a lot of minutes in and amongst the games he's played. You don't want to start getting to that point where your body's breaking down, you're not able to play every night. So Backstrom is important to Washington because that 1-2 punch of Kuznetsov and Backstrom is pretty intimidating. And also Ovechkin and his natural affinity for playing with Backstrom, although he's pretty good with Kuznetsov as well. That's important. So I've got Backstrom on the board. It's kind of complimentary to the Capitals that there really wasn't anybody else I looked at and said, well, yeah, hopefully that guy doesn't miss time this year or else, where I could find somebody who had missed time over the last 12 months. Now we move over to the West. Hampus Lindholm is my pick for the Ducks. A full season from Hampus would be fantastic. And for the Ducks, also important. Lindholm is probably one of the more underrated defensemen. We use that term a lot. Underrated players are talked about a lot to the point where I don't like doing videos on underrated players because then we can just have this debate that just goes in circles. But I do think Lindholm gets underrated, and I think injuries have probably made that even more stark than it otherwise would be. Arizona, I went with Jacob Chychrun, and yes, I could have said Darcy Kemper, but I'm going with Chychrun because over multiple seasons, he's had trouble staying healthy. And again, It's the style of defense that he plays. Much like Chris Tanev, there's a style of defense some of these guys play. It makes it hard to stay healthy. For Vancouver, I thought about Edler. Edler gets hurt a lot too. Of course, with Vancouver, I could just say defenseman. And it could go all the way back to the age of Doug Lidster, because Vancouver defenseman getting hurt, that's been a thing for decades. People are just joining the party now. Welcome. So yeah, Chychrun I went with for Arizona is a guy who I think, they're going to look for a full 56 games from, and he wants as well. With Colorado, and there could have been many, I went with Landeskog. And I hesitated between Landeskog or Rantanen. And I thought, no, Rantanen missed about, almost half the year last year, but it's not a year-over-year thing. And with Landeskog, it feels like there's more long-term where it's not just last year, but in previous seasons he's missed games as well. And again, there's a number I could have mentioned from Colorado. I could have mentioned Johnson. There's a few. I threw up Landeskog because to me he was the most prominent. And it doesn't feel like it's that long ago McKinnon would have been the one I had on the board, right? For the Kings, Gabe Vilardi. So I've talked about Vilardi previous. I'm going to make this quick. If Vilardi has any kind of back problems come up during this season, the back which kept him out of action for most of last year and for a lot of time since he was drafted, if that were to keep him out of action this year, that could submarine his spot in the LA Kings long-term plans, where they say, yeah, we like the player, he's skilled, but his back has become, an ongoing issue and that's something that we're hoping doesn't happen. Obviously, I'd be hoping doesn't happen. And so I have Vilardi on the board. I realize, again, as I go through these 31 players, I will be repeating some of the same players. And I apologize, but again, doing the 31 players thing, it's going to happen. There's only a certain number of players on the roster. Minnesota, I went with Zach Parise. And I know Parise was healthy this year, but his overall history tells you he's always going to be a risk. And whether that's fair to him or it's not, that's still a thing. Where Zach Parise, there's a risk of him getting hurt. This is when people say there's a risk of everybody getting hurt. I know, but with Parise's injury history, you kind of worry about a little bit more, especially I believe he's at age 36 as well. It definitely takes a little bit longer to recover from injuries as you get older. I've experienced that, and it sucks. Why does this still hurt? Right, because I'm old. Yeah. Anyways, so Parise, hopefully 56 games for him. San Jose, I went with Erik Karlsson. Again, it's the obvious one, right? Erik Karlsson has said he's 100%, says he's good to go. Erik Karlsson hasn't looked right since the 2017 playoffs. 2017 playoffs, guy plays on one leg for the Ottawa Senators. He's a hero. He's a warrior. But he hasn't seemed to be quite right since then. And as great as it was to see him through that playoff run, playing as well as he did, he hasn't quite seemed like himself. I'm hoping he does for San Jose this year. I guarantee you, paying him that contract, Doug Wilson really wants to see him back to 100%. Sharks fans and the Sharks players will as well. It'd make a huge difference if he's okay and if he can stay healthy throughout the year. For San Jose, Oscar Sundqvist. Another player that plays kind of a bruising style of game, that because of that style of game, he is very likely to end up missing time, which he has over the last couple of years. So if Sundqvist could stay healthy and still play that style of game, St. Louis fans would be very happy. Maybe he does end up in Seattle. We can look back on this in July and go, he knew. I don't think. Anyway, maybe. So St. Louis fans hoping for a full season from Sundqvist, and probably hoping I'm wrong that with the Seattle slip, right? It's going to happen. It's just, you do one take for videos, it's going to happen. You just there's a slip in there. And then for Vegas, I went with Alex Tuch. Alex Tuch missed a bunch of games this year. The other reason, too, with Tuch, it's sort of like a Jonathan Drouin thing. Vegas has a lot of depth, right? If Tuch was out and Vegas is doing well, and because Vegas is always looking at cutting costs, it seems like every year we're talking about somebody else being out for Vegas for cost reasons. We're, going into their fourth season. And because of that, I could see Tuch, if he got hurt this year, being a guy that Vegas goes, that contract to Tuch is not bad, but we'd like to go and get insert name of free agent here. Tuch missed some games we did really well without him. So Tuck may want to play games. Tuck, that home run pass they throw to Tuck is fantastic. If it connects regularly this year, I could see him scoring a bunch of goals. That's debatable as to whether or not they're going to be able to do that regularly, and other teams won't scout it within their own division, right? But Tuck, I think, is one of those guys that it's important that he shows he can stay healthy this year. The other part of it isn't just Vegas going, well, we could do without Tuck. It's, well, Tuck got hurt again this year. He missed a lot of time last year. Well, we need to cut some costs. That might be where we look. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Again, there are no right or wrong answers on this one. I know people are going to say there's right or wrong answers on this one. So let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.